My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
This episode is brought to you by Chevrolet. When you have 4 new tires, every drive feels fresh. Right now, buy 3 select tires and get 1 for just $1 during the Chevrolet Certified Service Fresh Start Tire event. Visit Chevrolet.com/service offers or see dealer for full details. At participating U.S. GM dealers only, highest or equal value tire will be $1. Offer ends 5/31/2025. Not available with other offers.
This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the New York State Republican Party and the County Chair of the Suffolk Republican Party. With us is our co-host and good friend, Eric Levine, noted commentator, essayist, and attorney. And I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Well, as we walk into the studio today, there's, as we say on Katz and Cosby, breaking news. And the breaking news, and it comes in 2 parts, which is very interesting. The first story was that Mike Waltz, who's a good friend of Eric Levine and a good friend of mine, and we know Mike very, very well, a very distinguished public servant, former member of Congress, Special Forces officer, and senior policy advisor in the Pentagon, advisor to Vice President Cheney on counterterrorism. Just an absolutely terrific guy, NSA director, and we were very pleased with that because, to me, he was one of the realists in the Trump administration. People like Rubio and Waltz really understood the threats to America from places like China, Russia, Iran, what Jesse and Eric and I call the axis of evil. And so that was the first piece, that he was leaving the position of NSA director along with his deputy. And I was very upset about this because I think Waltz is a countervailing force against what I call the neo-isolationists or the anti-interventionists, a crew led by the Tucker Carlson acolytes, such as Tulsi Gabbard, even the Vice President of the United States, Vance. Very unhappy about that group. I don't think they're realists. I don't think they're fighting the fight they should be, which is to make the United States as strong as possible and to really counter our enemies. But the second part of the Mike Waltz story, and Eric broke this story to me, and Jesse and I have to rely on his intelligence.
This is what I'm being told.
So that is
from reliable sources.
From reliable sources. I'll rely on...
I just got 2 more texts confirming it.
Oh, okay, he has 2 more texts that Mike is going to become the UN ambassador.
Now you're more reliable than the New York Times. At least you have sourcing.
No kidding about the New York Times, which is why I cut off my subscription to that, Jesse. So the short answer is, if Mike Waltz is going to the UN, he'll be a strong voice for America there. My humble opinion, and it's not that humble because it's backed up by Eric, and I'll let Eric speak for himself in a minute, is that the stronger position, the more important position, is the NSA director as a countervailing force against these neo-isolationists and these anti-interventionists, who I don't believe are realistically doing what they have to do to protect America and support our allies and friends. So I'm concerned about that we're losing a strong voice. And Rubio, I thought, needed him as an ally in the White House struggles. Eric, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing in large part playing out right now is a split, not just in the Trump White House, but generally in the Republican Party. We have the Reagan wing of the party that believes in engagement, NATO supporting strong allies, flexing and projecting power around the world, the U.S.-led, law-based, free trade international world order, which has served us so well since the Second World War. In fact, the United States has exponentially benefited more by it than any other country on the planet. It's part of the reason why it's called the American-led world order. Versus the isolationist populist wing of the party. I guess its most influential proponents are the vice president, J.D. Vance, talking heads like Tucker Carlson, advocates like Tulsi Gabbard, who kind of believe that you can build a wall around the United States and pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist. And what's interesting about them most of all, I think, is that if you compare their policy prescriptions of how to lead American foreign policy, they very much align with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. They start from a different point, but they end up in the same place. For the progressives, their position, their starting point is America's an evil country, systemically racist, and that to project power abroad is to project evil abroad. So bring America home so that we don't infect the rest of the world. From the isolationist wing of the Republican Party, their position generally is America is just so superior and so wonderful and so terrific that the rest of the world is undeserving of our largesse and our goodwill and American power. So bring America home. So different starting points, but you end up in the same place, bringing America home. And when you bring America home, when America leaves somewhere, bad things fill the vacuum. And that's what I think we're seeing in large part in the Trump White House right now. There's all these countervailing forces. The resignation of Mike Waltz and then his appointment to the UN. Now, clearly, it's a step down. As a national security advisor, you're helping formulate policy and implementing policy. At the head of the UN, you're really more just a mouthpiece of the country. I mean, it's an important position. Don't get me wrong, and I don't want to belittle it. But I think you wield much more influence inside the Oval Office, helping the president make policy. So this is a step down. Now, clearly, Mike Waltz is from the Marco Rubio, Eric Levine, Reagan wing of the party that believes America needs to project power abroad and believes in the Ronald Reagan peace through strength and really projecting strength and the American-led world order, which needs to be maintained. It'll be much more interesting, I think, rather than the Waltz appointment or nomination, because now he'll need Senate approval, to the UN to see who the president selects to be his national security advisor. If it is a J.D. Vance ally or a Tucker Carlson acolyte or a Tulsi Gabbard co-theorist, that'll tell us one thing about the direction of the president's foreign policy. If it's someone from the Reagan wing of the party, that'll tell us something else. But what's interesting about the Trump policy, foreign policy, is that there seems to be all these kind of countervailing forces that don't seem to necessarily align and butt heads. I mean, we see it both we see it both
they butt heads.
They do butt heads.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
We see it both in Iran and in Ukraine. Let's look at Iran for a second. To the president's credit, he also announced today that he's going to enforce secondary sanctions. Anybody who buys Iranian oil or petrochemicals is not going to be able to do business with the United States, and I applaud that. We have been moving all kinds of military assets to Diego Garcia, this island in the Indian Ocean. You don't go to Diego Garcia for a vacation. It's a military base. I mean, it's a UK possession, but we have free access, and we use the military base there. And it's from there we would launch an attack on Iran if we were to choose to do that, which I advocate for. But countervailing that, in contrast to that, we have these negotiations with the Iranians. I submit there's no point to having negotiations with the Iranians because there is no such thing. Any deal with Iran is a bad deal because there's nothing that we can give them that would protect us. The Iranians want to enrich uranium and have a nuclear weapon. Okay, we say you can't have that. You have to deconstruct your military nuclear capabilities. They'll never do it, but let's assume they say yes and they agree to do it. Then they'll say, okay, we want to have a civilian nuclear program. We want to be able to enrich our own uranium for a civilian program. We say, well, you can't do that because if you have any enrichment program, once Donald Trump leaves and there's a populist isolationist Republican or a progressive Democrat who becomes president, then the lid is off and they're going to start developing a nuclear weapon again. So you can't have a civilian nuclear program. You can't do any enrichment. So they say, okay, let's say we'll give up the civilian nuclear program, which they never will, but let's assume they do. Then they'll say, at a minimum, we need a relief on sanctions. So we can't give them the relief on sanctions because that's hundreds of billions of dollars. We know what they do with their hundreds of billions of dollars because they've been doing it since 1979. They rebuild their military. They will rebuild their global terrorist network, and they'll continue to expand their hegemonic goals in the region, and they will continue to try to destroy Israel, and they will continue to take to the streets and say death to America and death to Israel. You can't be giving a regime that wants to destroy you hundreds of billions of dollars with which to build weapons and the means to destroy you. So there's nothing we can give the Iranians. And that's even assuming they're willing to give up anything, which I don't believe they will. So I don't understand why we're having these negotiations, but we are. And you see the military buildup, you see the negotiations. I hear the response being, well, Trump's being smart. He's just trying to prove to the world the Iranians will say no, we won't be able to come to a deal, and then we'll attack. Well, I mean, I hope that's the case, but then you also see that we're sending nuclear technicians into the negotiations in advance of Steve Witkoff going back. If the whole goal and the whole purpose is to completely dismantle their nuclear program, why do you need nuclear technicians? It's just dismantle it. It doesn't take a nuclear technician to say dismantle it, or we're just going to send somebody in and to make sure that you have dismantled it. So that I'm a little concerned about. Then you look at Ukraine, similar kind of thing. Putin keeps attacking Kiev, keeps attacking Ukraine. We keep blaming Ukraine for invading itself. I don't quite understand that they've started the war. I mean, don't get me wrong. But I don't quite understand the Ukrainian policy. We claim we want to end the war, which would be great if we could on the right terms. Surrender can't be the right terms. But Putin just keeps attacking. I mean, this recent attack on Kiev in the wake of the negotiations. I mean, this is an act of a lunatic. This is the act of a genocidal maniac, and we think that we can reason with him and make a deal with him. I don't quite understand it. Then we say we're going to walk away. I don't understand what walk away means in this context. Does this mean we're going to walk away from the negotiations and continue to support Ukraine as a fight for their survival against the Russian invasion? Or does it mean we're just going to completely wash our hands of Ukraine altogether and stop sending them weapons, stop sending them the ability to protect themselves, stop giving them political cover, and just leave it to the Europeans completely? I just don't understand. But when there seems to be some sort of coherence to the policy, then something happens what makes it appear incoherent, and then something else happens which makes it coherent. So I think what we're seeing playing out is this strain between the Reagan wing of the party and the isolationist wing of the party, and I think whoever Trump appoints to be the new NSA director will give us a lot of information about which direction we're going.
So, Jesse, that's a lot to unpack. Where do you want to begin?
Well, let me begin with Mike Waltz. Number one, the whole premise of the two different wings of the party and butting heads, I don't think that's so much of a problematic. I think we've spoken in the past here about President Lincoln and his team of rivals. I think that I believe, and I have actually lived this in my small corner of the world, where bringing together a team of rivals that have differing opinions is fine. Is actually better than having yes men or hearing from one side. I think that one of the things we're missing here in the resignation of Mike Waltz and then his the breaking news that Eric has of being nominated for the UN ambassadorship is there was a souring relationship that was building between Mike Waltz and Susie Wiles, the chief of staff to the president. Now, we've all spoken glowingly about Susie Wiles. She has kept the train running on time. She has contained the president from sometimes his impulses, whether they be on the campaign or since January 20th when he took the oath of office. So obviously there must be some strain there between the top aide to the president and Mike Waltz.
What's the
I also think that
Jesse, let me just ask you this. So what was that strain about? That's the first time I've heard that.
I think it's a strain that, in moving forward about maybe on fundamental approach to these international and national problems that they have moving forward. Now, we've said if they're, she is the Ice Maiden. And she is someone that doesn't deal with drama. We don't know what's going on behind closed doors. And maybe there was just somebody or some bodies getting out front of their skis too further. He's been at time, Mike Waltz, we describe him from the Reagan side of the party, a strong in his positions. And I think he was a good choice for NSA. But something has been going on there. I think what I like about these decisions is that, number one, Trump is not falling into the trap of going through just a firing for the sake of firing type of situations or a revolving door. I think it was smart today. Any changes he was going to make was going to happen after the celebration of his 100th day. It wasn't that Mike Waltz, whatever differences they may have had on the NSA, he was going to simply just throw him out like he did many individuals, good people, in his first term. No, he's utilizing his talents in a different position. So I think that one of the things we have to see that goes on here is having differing wings or different philosophies with at least a single goal of projecting American might, how that's projected. Now, when we talk about J.D. Vance and Galbert, one thing I think we have to consider is that these individuals and others in this cabinet and in the NSA have worn the uniform. These are not people who are want to appease any type of aggression. So these are individuals that have worn the uniform. They have served our country. They have been in the field of battle. So I think you need to bring that perspective that's been going on. Obviously, the way that we've been handling Iran during the Obama administration and during the Biden administration was not going right. The way we were handling Ukraine, whether we like it or not, under Biden and Obama, was not operating right. It needed to take a different approach to it. So as we go now, we tack to Ukraine and Russia. I think that the recently just announced agreement, the mineral deal that the United States just reached with Ukraine. And I think it shows a couple of different dynamics when it comes to Donald Trump in this issue. And I just wanted three major developments, I think, that occurred here. Number one is Trump wanted to try and get Putin to the table. He had trusted that he could use it, whether through its charm or through its playing neutrality to get everyone to the table, whichever way he viewed it to get him to the table. I think he has seen that that you can't reason with him. And he was very, very direct in his verbal assault and policy assaults on Putin as he continued to make attacks. I think a second point here that, was a game changer and move forward and see the development of Trump's policies is the moment that was taken between Zelensky and Trump at Pope Francis's funeral. That moment that came about 2 months after the blow up in the Oval Office was important because it demonstrates that there's always a need for us to be with our partners. Like Trump recognizes that. His administration recognizes that. Now, if you're part of the Reagan faction, as Eric describes, the Vances and the people who want to engage. I'm sorry, no, the isolationists. I apologize. You would imagine they must be in an uproar for that meeting. But coming out of that sessions and whatever has been progressing, we now have this mineral deal, which places a U.S. presence right there in a key area and of an infrastructure area that now Putin's got to be worried about. It also calls for, the United States to recoup some of its investments financially. From that point of view, it creates a reinvestment fund for the reconstruction of Ukraine, and it opens the flow of more U.S. military aid through air defense to Kiev and Ukraine. And did it take longer than it was needed? It did. But it also demonstrated, I believe, Trump's patience, because now there's a significant financial and material support to the United States for our defense of Ukraine. And I think that's what's important. Today is a bad day. Thursday, when we're taping this show, and the announcement of this mineral deal and infrastructure deal, financial structure deal, is a bad day for Putin and Russia, quite frankly. And as we go to Iran, as Eric pointed to, Number one, I do agree. I think we agreed, and we were emailing in the week leading up to this show. Eric's column in the in the Wall Street Journal, where a proposed deal, or at least talking an engagement in a deal, he's hopeful but doubtful. I think the world sees that, and I honestly do agree that this is Trump trying to demonstrate to the region, to the world, that he tried to seek a peaceful solution, but he knows all the way the whole time that he's not. He wouldn't have announced these secondary sanctions if he realized or thought that this was going to be an issue. He was continues, I think, now maybe speaking to a coalition of nations. And simultaneously, our Defense Secretary, Hegseth, which has been leading the charge on about 1,000 missiles being sent into Houthi strongholds, has basically issued a stark warning to Iran that their continued use and obstruction and funding of these proxy groups against the United States, against the United States allies and United States personnel, they've been warned that we are ready, the United States is ready, and the United States is capable of doing what needs to be done to render their systems useless and no longer in existence. We can describe a whole bunch of way of maybe different diplomatic diplomacy can take place. I think the diplomacies of the 19th century and the 20th century and the early 21st century are gone. I think that it is, in a way, from my perspective, and I'm no foreign policy expert by any means, that the one thing that we cannot be is predictable. And if there's one thing President Trump has demonstrated, is that you cannot predict what he as the leader is going to do next, except for one thing, is to keep this country safe, to keep this country secure, and to take actions when it's warranted for its allies, Israel being the perfect example there. But we also have to consider that in countries like NATO, which I believe we should always remain part of that. Listen, we've been footing the bill for a long time. And
Jesse, would you hold that thought? Would you hold that thought for a minute? Because I have to take a hard break.
No problem.
We'll come back to you to lead off the second segment, and then Eric has some comments, and I'll have some comments. This is Let the Record Show. You can see that Eric and Jesse and I are very wound up today about what's going on in the world. The one thing you can predict, you may not predict Trump with certainty, but you can predict that in but a few moments we'll be back on the second segment of Let the Record Show with Chairman Garcia and noted attorney, commentator, and essayist Eric Levine, and with me, Judge Richard Weinberg.
This is Let the Record Show.
ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track, and ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
Ladies, you'll end up shopping for your guy's deodorant, right? So try Degree's Original Cool Rush. You see, last year, Degree changed the formula, and men were mad. One guy even started a petition. So Degree admitted they messed up and brought the Original Cool Rush scent back. It's clean, crisp, and actually smells like someone you want to cuddle. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So toss one in your cart and find out why it's the best-selling men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory.
Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTESLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
Your snacking routine can get a little dull. Time for a light and fit remix. Like a crunchy storm of graham cookies, caramel pearls, and dark chocolate, showering down into a smooth, creamy yogurt. Enjoy 3 light and fit remix varieties with craveable flavors and up to 120 calories and 10 grams of protein per 4.5-ounce serving. See remixyogurt.com.
This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the New York State Republican Party and the County Chair of the Suffolk County Republican Party. With us is our good friend, co-host Eric Levine, noted attorney, commentator, and essayist. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Jesse, when I interrupted you in the first segment, I apologize, but it's all Rich's fault. In the booth, he's the one who shut this down.
Jesse was on a roll.
Jesse was on a roll. So, Jesse, finish up your roll. Finish your roll.
Finish rolling.
Finish rolling. We'll turn it over to Eric and then come back to me.
Because we are far more accurate and always want to be transparent. Let me just correct. When I referenced a column or an essay by my dear friend Eric Levine, I had said it was published in the Wall Street Journal. It was not. It is worthy of being published in the Wall Street Journal.
We all concur. But as I said
couldn't
at the break,
agree more. I couldn't agree more.
Of course you couldn't. Listen, as I said at the break, when we were talking amongst the three of us before we came back, I said the good news is it wasn't in the Wall Street Journal because Eric would not be able to walk through the door of the studio because his head would be so swollen. So, Eric,
the only thing I was adding on is that even the General Secretary of NATO and the countries of the European Union or members of NATO have admitted that it's time for them to increase their financial contributions to their defense of their countries and of NATO to match that of the United States. So that's the one part that we were at the close that I was adding as we were talking about Iran and jumping from Iran to Mike Waltz. And
we were jumping around a lot, but that's the wonderful thing about this show. We cover a lot of material, and
most of it makes sense.
And most of it makes sense, and always intelligent insights, whether you agree or disagree.
It makes sense.
All right, Eric.
But consistent with what we were talking about, within seconds of my stopping my little speech before Jesse went, I got a text which is saying, and it's from a reliable source, but I have not been able to confirm it, but that Marco Rubio is going to be the acting national security advisor. If that's true, which would be wonderful, wonderful news. If that's true, then it seems that in this particular instance, then the Reagan wing of the party remains strong and vital.
The question becomes, how long is he going to be the acting, and who's going to replace him?
Well, exactly. So
he's not going to be both the NSA
and the Secretary of State. It's hard to imagine, but this is this whiplash that Jesse, you talk about. It's good for the United States to be unpredictable. That's sometimes true. That's not always true.
Sometimes you need certainty and predictability.
Exactly. Sometimes you need to be able to say, this is our red line. Because if you don't define red lines, then your adversaries don't know how far they can go. And they can't make informed decisions.
This is a country that's also moved red lines over and over again. Not under Republican administration,
that's a
but
different,
Democratic administration.
That's true. That's a different point. Obama, of course, is the one who leaps to mind his red line in Syria that he never enforced. But so there has to be two things. You have to be able to draw red lines and say this far and no further, and you have to be believed that you will enforce it. And you can avoid wars that way and confrontations that way if your adversaries know they can go so far and no further. And typically you don't want to cross the United States. That has unfortunately always been the case. But what also you talk about, NATO says that they've come to the conclusion that they now must pony up and do their 3%, 4%, 5% of their GDP towards the national security and military expenditures, and I support that wholeheartedly. And absolutely, they should. But we also have to be careful. Look what happened in Canada recently, just this past week, the election in Canada. The Liberal candidate, who had been behind 15, 20, 25 points behind the Conservative candidate, was a pro-American, pro-West, pro-Israel, pro-NATO, would have
been a great prime minister.
Would have been a great prime minister.
And it got sabotaged by whom?
And it got, unfortunately, because of Donald Trump's talk about 51st state and the tariffs and the trade war. Canadians reacted very poorly to that and elected a liberal in the Justin Trudeau image, who is not pro-America, who is weak on defense, who is weak in his support of Israel, and is weak on defending Western civilization. So we have to be careful. We don't want to constantly be berating our allies. There's a way to nudge them. There's a way to get them to where we need them to be without publicly humiliating them, the way that Trump, unfortunately, seemed to have done that in Canada. There was a very bad reaction to that. And you make the point that on the secondary sanctions regarding Iran, which I applaud Trump for wholeheartedly. I think it's fantastic. It's absolutely the right thing to do. Russia has been supporting the Houthis. Russia has been sending them weapons and intelligence. And there's no difference between what the Russians are doing with the Houthis and what the Iranians are doing with the Houthis. But I don't understand why the Iranians incur wrath, as they should. But the Russians somehow, I don't want to say they get a pass, but they're not treated as forcefully as, in my opinion, they should be. Because, as Richard pointed out, there's this axis of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. They are attempting to disrupt and displace the American-led world order. They do not want the United States to be the indispensable nation. They want to dispense with the United States. So we can't view what's going on in the Middle East in isolation of what's going on in Ukraine, in isolation of what's going on in Taiwan. These four countries their destinies right now are locked together. Remember, Iran makes drones that they sell to the Russians that they use to kill Ukrainians. The North Koreans send soldiers to Russia to fight Ukraine. China imports cheap oil from Iran and gives economic and military support to Russia so they can fight in Ukraine. It is all integrated. You cannot separate these four. You can't look at them in isolation. So the goal should be to weaken that axis. And we're not going to weaken it, and we should weaken it in the easiest way possible. And the easiest way possible is taking out the weakest link, and that right now is Iran. The Israelis have successfully taken out all their military, their missile, their anti-missile systems. They're completely naked to an Air Force attack, to a missile attack. Now's the time to take out Iran. They are the weak link. And by weakening Iran or having regime change in Iran, hopefully the Iranian people will rise up and remove the regime. You weaken China, Russia, and North Korea. And I have no problems with a trade war with China. China's an enemy. It's not a shooting war. It may one day be, unfortunately. But right now we are in a war with China. We have to recognize that. So I think Americans would be willing to absorb a lot of pain, or at least some pain, in a trade war with China because they recognize why we need to do it. Just like during the Second World War, Americans were willing to absorb all kinds of pain and make sacrifices for the greater good. But I don't think people are willing to make sacrifices for a trade war with Canada or Denmark or France or Australia. Those are countries I think most people would rather we just work our differences out calmly, peacefully, without 50% tariffs, 40% tariffs, whatever we're imposing on people, and tariffs are, of course, a tax. So it is having an adverse impact on the American people. Now, I hope Donald Trump is right, and I hope he succeeds. I really do, because if he succeeds in this, we all succeed. But some of these trade negotiations, these trade pacts, these bilateral trade negotiations, they're going to happen pretty soon. They're going to have to reach some sort of conclusion pretty soon.
Well, let me let me pick up on that. I submit to you that it's time for Trump to have a course correction. I think if he continues the way he's doing, he had a good first round in his first 100 days, but he's really slipped. And the poll numbers show he's slipped. And he's at risk of losing the majority in the House of Representatives, which will empower the Democrats in the House. As bad as they are, as a party doesn't have a rational, cohesive, moral message at all, but people will vote in response to their Trump fatigue, and they will elect a House controlled by Democrats, which will put us on a path for more investigations, more fraudulent nonsense out of the committees, and impeachment attempts. That's what's going to happen. Trump has got to realize that. Just as Eric just alluded to, you make the mistake of alienating your friends, like Canada, and you lost a good prime minister, and you got somebody who's a dangerous one for the Western Alliance. You're running the risk of turning over the power of the House of Representatives with subpoena power, its investigative power, its impeachment power, over to the crazy left wing, which controls the Democratic Party. And that's a risk. Trump has to have a course correction. He celebrated his first 100 days, and there were a lot of victories. He's closed the border, God bless him. He's deporting these illegal migrants. He's making us safer. He's getting away from DEI and critical race theory. He's attacking racism and anti-Semitism on the campuses. He was doing very well with the economy for a while. But what does he need to do now? And this is what I submit to you, Jesse and Eric. What he needs to do now is he has to, number one, cut trade deals and cut them quickly. He cannot allow this to go on for months and months and months. If he does that, people are going to be hurt in the pocketbook and their confidence in the economy, and that will elect the Democrats. Next, he's got to get the tax bill through. The 2017 tax bill has to be extended. It has to be extended now. It should be done by the end of this month, by Memorial Day. It's got to be done. It's got to be done now, because you're not going to have the impact on the economy unless it's done quickly. Again, predictability and certainty, you need to have that. What else does he have to do? He has to make sure that the U.S. military is prepared for the dangers we face from this axis of evil. We have to build up our Navy, our resources all around the globe. We have to get our allies in place doing the right thing to back the Western civilization against this onslaught of these hegemonic tyrannies. We have to do that. So, pass the taxes, prepare our military, get off of these endless tariff wars. You want to have a tariff war against China and your enemies? Swell, leave our allies alone. And final thing I'll say before I turn this over to Jesse is this. If we don't recognize now that negotiations are not a virtue in themselves, they are not your end game, we're making a terrible mistake. Negotiations are a way to achieve a result. But there are times that negotiations are used by the other side to just play you, run the clock. And that's exactly what Iran has done with their nuclear weaponization campaign. They cannot be trusted. The only thing you can trust about Iran is you can't trust Iran. If they have nuclear weapons, the world will change for the worse. You cannot trust Russia. Russia has to be contained. You cannot reward them by giving them pieces of the Ukraine as reward for their hegemonic adventurism. Jesse, your thoughts?
Well, you spoke a little bit about the upcoming elections and the midterms. Historically, traditionally, the party in power in the White House loses ground in the midterm elections. However, I do submit to both of you that it's truly too early to discuss where that is, because you pointed out the two major issues that are right there. In fact, it's the major issue that's going to determine what the success of this presidency is going to be, and what the success of the Republicans to maintain control of the House and the U.S. Senate. And that is the big, beautiful bill, whatever you want to call it, the extension of the 2017 Trump-era tax cuts and its spending plan, this reconciliation bill. That is the key to what's going to be happening in the midterm elections. On the tariffs with our allies, gentlemen, and listen, I submit that I'm probably the least capable to speak on this issue. You guys are far smarter than I. But for years, the tariffs have been uneven. The president announced that there was either you come to the table and reduce your tariffs, or so we can have reciprocal tariffs at that point. And not until he began the process of doing that, ally or foe alike, that these trade deals were finally going to be, we're gaining momentum with national heads of states coming to speak to him personally at the White House or through their envoys on this. You know, sometimes it's important. You got to drag your allies, your friends, your neighbors to the table to get things that are done right. I don't think we can disagree. I don't think we should disagree here. Maybe I'm wrong, as I said.
Not possible.
I don't think we've been treated fairly when it comes to the different sides of the tariffs. What they charged our goods, what we charge their goods coming in and imports, and certainly when you have countries that don't even allow us to access their markets. There needed to be if there was a course correction that needed to be made, as difficult as that is, and that is right now, it needed to be done. Someone needed to do it.
Well, that's well said. Once again, Rich is giving us a signal that we have to take a break. This is Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, noted commentator, essayist, and attorney Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Please stay with us. We'll be back in but a few moments for our final segment of today's show. Please stay tuned for more interesting and important conversation.
This is Let the Record Show.
Plan on flying? It's time to upgrade to a Real ID. Because in order to board domestic flights, your driver's license or state-issued ID must be a Real ID, or you'll need another acceptable form of identification. So don't wait. Find out how to get your Real ID at tsa.gov/RealID. That's tsa.gov/RealID. Or visit your local DMV. And then you'll be cleared for takeoff.
This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Welcome back to Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the New York State Party, as well as the County Chair for the Republicans out in Suffolk County, Long Island. With us is our noted commentator, essayist, and attorney, our good friend Eric Levine. I want to switch gears, gentlemen. I want to talk about this whole lawfare against Trump's policies. You know, you have these nationwide injunctions, which are just awful, because you have one U.S. District Court judge out of 700 odd judges who can block a whole policy and impose his or her will and stop an effective executive given the powers under the United States Constitution to protect and defend this country and to do the right thing for its citizenry. And I think these judges have to be reined in. They can be reined in by the Supreme Court. Supreme Court can issue a rule telling these district court judges, no, you can't do this. Or a case can go up to the U.S. Supreme Court, so holding, or the Congress can pass a law limiting them to the geographic territory of the district in which they sit and the parties to the case. There are ways of dealing with this problem. This is a problem that has to be dealt with. Nationwide injunctions are reprehensible and they have to be stopped. Second, you have these judges who issue temporary restraining orders, and they keep extending the temporary restraining orders, so in fact they become preliminary injunctions. Now, temporary restraining orders under the federal rules are not appealable. A preliminary injunction may be appealable, but certainly not a temporary restraining order. It's not a coincidence that they issue TROs, temporary restraining orders, and they keep extending them because they avoid the problem of appeal and being set aside. And that's why they're doing that. So these TROs that keep getting extended, that has to be curbed too, and the Supreme Court should rein that in as well. A TRO shouldn't last more than 10 days and maybe give one more adjournment in extraordinary circumstances. Now, let me add to that picture in the legal scene. And I tell you, this is as a judge on the bench for 15 years. We always cooperated with law enforcement when I was on the bench. If law enforcement, whether it was a state law enforcement or it was federal, we cooperated with them. We didn't usher them through the back door, put them on a judge's elevator, got them out of the building when they were about to be arrested. You can't do that. That's an obstruction of governmental administration. It's illegal. It's aiding and abetting. There are at least 3 or 4 crimes you could come up with. And these judges who've been doing this, you have one in Milwaukee and you have another one in Boston. The Biden administration, after she was investigated, about to be prosecuted, let her off the hook and turned it over to a disciplinary committee in Boston. And, of course, the disciplinary committee in Boston, the Massachusetts bar being totally controlled and the judiciary being controlled by the left-wing Democrats, they're having a hearing, but they'll let her off the hook. She should be prosecuted. She should be convicted. She'd be removed from the bench, and she should be...
She was removed from the bench.
No.
I thought...
No, not the Boston one. They let her off the hook.
Oh, the one in Wisconsin.
The one in Wisconsin hasn't been removed. She's been suspended.
Okay.
Big difference. Has not been removed. Has been suspended. And you had another judge in I think it was Wisconsin, who said, I stand with her, and I'm not going to conduct judicial business until this whole policy changes. That's not the role of a judge. A judge is not a politician. A judge is not a super legislator. A judge's job is to be fair and impartial, to apply the law to the facts, and not to be ideological. And I'll close out my remarks on this by pointing this out. And I would have probably begun the show today by talking about this, but this is as good a segue as anyway. Once upon a time, there was a professor, I think, at Columbia University named Daniel Bell, and he wrote a book called The End of Ideology, The End of Ideology, which is that things were going so well in Western civilization and things were falling into place that you weren't going to have extreme ideologies impacting people's lives and the forces of history. And I submit to you that premise was absolutely dead wrong. Now more than ever in my lifetime do we have ideologies prevalent. You have ideology on the left, you have it on the right, you have extremists on the left and the right, you have religious zealots who believe that they're going to heaven if they kill enough of their enemies. I mean, the fact of the matter is we live in an era of ideology. And the last people who should deal with ideological decision-making are judges, whether they're state judges or federal judges. Judges should be in the business of being fair and impartial, dealing with the cases before them, dealing with the law and applying the law properly. And you apply the law to the facts of the case, not to create a political narrative. Eric.
Yes, I think we've discussed this in the past on the show. I think it speaks to the difference in view amongst progressive Democrats and Republicans, or just Democrats in general now, because it's hard to find a Democrat that's not a progressive, of the role of the judiciary.
Wait, you're looking at one right now.
What, that you're a progressive Democrat?
No.
You're not a Democrat.
Jesse, will you just defend me, please?
No, you're not a Democrat.
Absolutely. You're a common sense Democrat.
Thank you. Amen. All right. Go ahead, Eric.
I don't buy it. Anyway, but amongst a significant portion of the Democratic Party, they view the judiciary as a super legislature. If we can't win at the polls, if we can't elect executives, a president or a governor, or a legislature, a Congress, a Senate that supports our views, we're going to go to the courts, and we're going to get the courts to rewrite laws and enforce them as consistent with their philosophy, not their judicial philosophy, but with their political philosophy. So it's the politicization of the judiciary. So I think that's in large part where we're seeing Republicans, or traditional Republicans, or most common sense Americans understand that the role of the judiciary is to be like an umpire, calling balls and strikes. They're not there to rewrite laws. They're there to interpret and enforce the laws, and that's what. And this is where these judges go off the rails, and it just adds to the hypocrisy. Nobody's above the law, we're told by the left, supposedly, except unless, of course, you adopt their philosophy and you break the law in aid of a cause that they think more important than the law. And in this circumstance, it's judges helping to hide illegal immigrants from lawful arrests and detainments. But for some reason, we know the reason. But if the ends justify the means, no one's above the law unless you're doing something that I agree with, or you're supporting a philosophy or a political point of view that I agree with. We got to get back to judges just calling balls and strikes. Congress makes the laws, the executive branch enforces the law, and the judiciary interprets the law. That's how the system is designed to work. And there's a system of checks and balances. There are lanes that each of these branches of government need to stay in, and we need to get back to that. And in terms of these nationwide injunctions, another potential proposal is that Congress passes the law that there can be no district court has the power, a single judge has a power to issue a nationwide injunction, but it has to go to the circuit court, the appellate court. If there's that way, at least there are at least 3 judges who are opining as to whether or not there should be some sort of constraint or restraint on the executive branch, and whether or not there's an abuse of power. But this notion that some guy sitting in a courtroom in Portland, Oregon, has the ability to prevent the President of the United States from trying to protect and defend the American people from enemies foreign and domestic, that somehow he or she is better positioned and is wiser and has the power, even though they've never received a single vote, that somehow they can prevent the president, there is something really disturbingly wrong. As someone once said, the Constitution is not a suicide pact.
Justice Robert Jackson, my hero.
Thank you. The Constitution is there to be implemented. It is a genius document, but it really requires human beings who are flawed to understand that there are certain lanes that they must stay in. And it is really helpful if the American people can rise up and say the judiciary belongs in their lane, the executive branch belongs in its lane, and the legislative branch belongs in its lane. And there's going to be times when there's push and pull and there's going to be overlap, but that's how the system is designed to work. That's why it's called checks and balances. But at the end of the day, we should ultimately default to the person or persons that the people elected, not to unelected officials if there's going to be some sort of confrontation between the two branches.
Jesse, your thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to point out that in these first 100 days, the Democrats and their allies have dropped about 200 lawsuits on the Trump administration. But that's not the start of the lawfare. As you know, we've discussed this for years. This lawfare began shortly after Donald Trump left the White House, and then when he was gaining momentum to seek re-election to the White House, to be one of only 2 presidents to serve non-consecutive 2 terms as our president. They started trying to keep him off the ballot. They began to try and keep him, to make him disqualified by putting him in jail. Many of those cases, if not all, all of them were bogus, and many of them were ended or rejected in many cases. I think what you pointed out, these 200 law cases have exposed the problem with the national TROs from the district court. And let's just take a look at, what are the top Democrat policies that these lawsuits are trying to protect? They're trying to protect DEI. That's what they're trying to protect. They're trying to protect transgender abilities for men to compete in women's sports, or to prevent the implementation of the Trump executive order banning transgender people from serving in the U.S.
And what about the border?
Right, to prevent people who are here illegally from being
if
deported.
You're here, Jesse,
Exactly.
If you're here illegally, you don't have a right to be here, and administratively you can be picked up and thrown the hell out of the country.
Yeah, I was going to close with that. But I'm glad you pointed that out. But the other one is they wanted to stop the government spending our tax dollars on programs like NGOs or not-for-profits that were all political part of the Democratic apparatus. It was mostly taxpayer-funded party building politics and such, which is wrong. But what did Trump do? Did he take shots at the judiciary? He did. Did he name call? He did. Do I wish he didn't do that? I absolutely wish he didn't do that. But what did he not do? He didn't talk about packing the court and changing the system of government of the judiciary to find like-minded individuals that will support him and be yes men or women for him. He didn't talk about violence against these Supreme Court justices, that they were going to be, we should be storming them in their private lives, at their private homes, or when they're out. He didn't do any of that. This is just an ongoing lawfare against Donald Trump. And if we think that the Democrats are just going to stop with Donald Trump and their lawfare tactics, because right now, what they're doing with their singing protests, their dancing protests, their sit-in protests are accomplishing nothing. And what are they not accomplishing, and how do we know that? Because CNN, probably not the most conservative mainstream media outlet there is, their polling shows that Donald Trump, even though they declare him, quote, unpopular, has an 8-point advantage with the American people over Democrats in Congress. They give him, and people trust Republicans with the economy and border security to the tune of +9 and +19. What's interesting, though, but just to spread, who do you trust more to run our government? Donald Trump at 40%, or Democrats in the Congress at 32%? An 8-point vote. An 8-point margin, is astronomical on the national level. That doesn't mean that it's not going to shrink. And I will tell you, if they don't pass this big, beautiful bill, that 8% is going to swing 16% negative for Republicans. We'll be trailing Democrats because we haven't been able to demonstrate that we can govern. So far, Republicans have demonstrated that. But let's go back to the judiciary. They certainly have demonstrated that they want a super legislature because they cannot win the battle of ideas, of solutions, or policy that are common sense and relatable to the American people. And the Republicans have that advantage that we're dealing with now. They need this super legislature to be their partner. And thankfully, listen, we're going to win some, we're going to lose some. As long as we abide by the law, I have no problem. But I do appreciate the fact that Donald Trump will not stop. He will appeal every decision until he gets to the Supreme Court. And I applaud the Republicans in the Congress for saying maybe it's time to change and limit the scope of district court judges in their small territories being able to issue national TROs.
Well said. We're going to have to conclude now. This has been Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party, noted commentator, essayist, and attorney Eric Levine. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. We thank you for listening. We look forward to being with you again next week. God bless you. God bless your families. And, of course, God bless America. Thank you for listening.